girl 8 years old held her mother's hand and asked the question that would change everything. "Mommy, if I give a little piece of myself, can I save someone who is dying?"
What she didn't know was that the life she was about to save was her own father's. The man her mother was forced to abandon years ago. The same man whose family paid for Clara to disappear forever when they discovered she was pregnant.
Now fate has brought them together in the most impossible place, the ICU of the hospital where Clara works. Marcos Tavares, the billionaire CEO, is dying of leukemia, and only one person in the entire world has the compatible bone marrow that can save him.
His own daughter. The daughter he never knew existed.
Clara faces the impossible dilemma: let the man she loves die, or risk revealing the secret she has protected for 8 long years and facing the powerful family that once destroyed her.
This isn't just a story about illness or healing. It's about family secrets that come back to haunt us. It's about a mother who loved so much that she gave up everything to protect her daughter, and about a man who had to come close to death to discover what truly matters in life.
But before we continue, I want to know from you, what would you do in Clara's place? Would you let your father die to protect your daughter? Or would you risk everything in the hope of a happy ending?
Comment on where you're watching from, because this story will make you question how far you would go for love.
Clara Almeida walked briskly through the hospital corridors, the sound of her shoes echoing on the cold tile floor. The night shift was long, and the mingled smells of antiseptic and stale coffee enveloped her like an inevitable routine. Between patients, she watched the city lights through the window, wondering if, somewhere, the past was watching her too. She had avoided thinking about Marcos Tavares for years, but the silence of the early morning was enough for his name to throb in her mind again. When she arrived home, she found Julia asleep on the sofa, her small body wrapped in a pink blanket. She smiled tenderly and kissed her forehead, as she did every night, trying to hide the tightness in her chest. Being a mother was what kept her alive, even with the burden of a secret she would never reveal. The framed portrait on her desk showed a younger version of her, smiling beside a man in a suit, a man whom time and pain had transformed into a memory. Marcos had been the love of her life. Young, ambitious, full of plans and promises, he had sworn to protect her from everything. But the power of his family was stronger than any vow of love. Helena Tavares, his cold-hearted mother-in-law, destroyed what they had built. Clara was cast out of his life like a stain, taking with her a life no one wanted. Now, 8 years later, she was the head nurse in the ICU of a large public hospital. She had learned not to allow herself to falter, not in front of patients, not in the face of pain. But in the wee hours of the morning, when exhaustion overcame her, she remembered Marcus's eyes and wondered if he ever thought of her. Fate, however, likes to play with those who believe they've overcome the past. And that cold night, as she was finishing her shift, a phone call from the emergency room would change everything. An important patient had just been admitted. Clara didn't know it yet, but life was about to bring her face to face with the man who had once destroyed and saved her heart. If you believe that destiny always brings back the ones we love, sign up now and experience more stories like this. On the 48th floor of Tavares Holding, the air smelled of expensive perfume and anxiety. Marcos Tavares, in an impeccable suit, was discussing figures with the board when he felt a sudden dizziness. His words began to lose meaning, and the glass of water slipped from his hands. He tried to lean on the table, but his vision blurred like a blank screen. When he fell, the sound echoed loudly, and the silence that followed was the first sign that something was deeply wrong. Hours later, the diagnosis came like a sentence: acute myeloid leukemia. The man accustomed to dominating the market, shareholders, and the fate of thousands of employees was now a prisoner of his own body. The disease made no distinction between the poor and the billionaires, and Marcos felt for the first time the weight of being merely human.
Helena Tavares, his mother, reacted as she always had, with control and calculation. "Hire the best doctors," she ordered, without a single tear. Her love was measured in appearance, not in affection. Marcos, between feverish deliriums, saw the faces of those he had lost, his father, his friends, and somewhere in the distance, Clarice, the only one he could never forget. In the following days, the empire he had built began to crumble. Meetings were postponed, stocks fell, and investors became hesitant. Inside the private hospital, a powerful man became hostage to a fate no amount of money could buy. The CEO who had dictated the rules of the corporate world now depended on transfusions and hope. As he slept, feverish and pale, he whispered a name no one recognized: Clara. The nurse on duty noted it in his chart, thinking it was delirium. But fate, with its sense of irony, was already preparing the reunion that would change their lives forever. The news arrived during the afternoon shift. "New patient in ICU 3, a serious case of fulminant leukemia," the head of the shift announced. Clara, exhausted, tidied up her papers and headed to the room, unaware of what awaited her. When she pushed open the door and saw the man unconscious in the bed, the world stopped. Time, for a moment, refused to move forward. The pale face and dark hair, even thinned by illness, were unmistakable. Marcos Tavares. That name she'd been trying to bury for almost a decade throbbed again, now accompanied by the rhythmic sound of the machines around her. A mixture of shock, anger, and compassion filled her chest. She wanted to leave, but her feet felt stuck to the ground. Clara tried to maintain her composure. She was a nurse, not a woman facing a former love. She adjusted the monitors, checked vital signs, and wrote them down in the chart, her heart pounding wildly. Every professional touch was a battle against her memory, against the memory of the man who promised eternal love and left her behind. Hours later, in the break room, she leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Fate had a sense of poetic cruelty. He who had driven her from his life with bitter words was now at the mercy of her help. But something was different. The fragility in his face shattered the wall of hatred she had built with so much effort. At night, at home, Julia jumped on the sofa, laughing at her own stories. "Mommy, why are you sad?" she asked, with the purity of someone unaware of the weight of secrets. Clara smiled, feigning lightness. "Just tiredness, my love." But inside her, something was already stirring, a premonition that life would never be the same again. In the following days, Clara tried to avoid direct contact, asking to change departments. Her request was denied. "You're the only one with the experience to handle the case," the clinical director said. Fate, once again, was pushing her where she didn't want to be.
Caring for Marcos became a daily test. Every glance at him was a reminder of the past, the touch of his hands, his easy laugh, the promises that time had erased. Now he was pale, vulnerable, and this aroused a compassion that infuriated her. One early morning, while checking the machines, Marcos opened his eyes for a brief second. He looked at her, confused, and whispered something barely audible. "You, Clara?" The world seemed to go silent. She stepped back, her heart racing. "Rest, Mr. Tavares," she said, feigning coolness, but her voice trembled. As she left the room, silent tears fell. She knew the reunion was just the beginning, and that the past was now alive again. The next morning, Clara heard the muffled sound of conversations in the medical room. Marcos's tests had come back, and the prognosis was worse than anyone expected. Conventional treatment had been ineffective. The only hope was a bone marrow transplant, and the chances of finding a compatible donor were slim.
Clara listened as the doctor explained the case in a cold, technical voice, but to her, those words sounded like a sentence. Behind the uniform and professionalism, her heart was pounding like a terrified woman's. Transplant, compatibility, urgency. Each word pierced her chest like a reminder of what was to come. At home that night, Clara couldn't sleep. Yulia played with a doll, unaware of the turmoil gripping her mother. The girl's father's face, now lying in bed, appeared in the shadows of the living room. Clara felt the weight of a dilemma she didn't want to face. The next day, Clara announced the need for testing of potential donors. Patients and close family members would be screened. Clara felt her blood run cold. Yulia had inherited so much from Marcos: his gaze, his blood type, even his curious way of looking at the world. A possibility, both terrifying and miraculous, formed in her mind. Without telling anyone, Clara discreetly requested an additional test in her daughter's name, under wraps. She explained that it was for an internal study, something technical. The lab technician, unsuspecting, accepted. In the days that followed, she lived in a limbo between hope and fear. The results arrived in a plain brown envelope, as if it didn't carry the power to change 3 lives. Clara opened it alone in the hospital bathroom. Her hands trembled. Seeing the report, she felt the ground disappear. Yulia was a match, a complete match. For minutes, she stood motionless, staring at the cold letters on the paper. Tears began to fall, mixing with the water in the sink. Fate had chosen her daughter to save the man who had once destroyed her, and perhaps, unknowingly, the child's own father. In the following days, Clara avoided looking at Marcos. She watched over him like a silent shadow, hiding her despair beneath her professional mask. When he smiled, even weakly, she looked away. How could she bear to watch his life slip away, knowing that the cure slept every night in her small apartment?
At night, leaning over Julia's crib, Clara whispered softly, "You will save a life, my love, but he must never know who you are." The silence of the house was her only response, as silent tears wet the sheets. The envelope with the results remained tucked away in the back of Clara's drawer, like a pulsating secret, ready to explode. Each time I opened it, the cold letters seemed to scream, "Fully compatible." Fear and hope silently battled within her. Saving Marcos would mean reopening old wounds, but letting him die would deny her daughter the chance to do good, something she so admired in Yulia. In the following days, Clara lived in torment. In the hospital, she watched Marcos's condition worsen, watching his strength slowly fade. He tried to smile, to hide his fear, but his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. Sometimes, she caught him staring at the ceiling, motionless, as if calculating the time he had left. The once invincible man now seemed dwarfed by his own mortality. At home, Julia played doctor with a toy stethoscope. "Mommy, if I were a real doctor, I would heal all the sad people." The innocence of her words struck Clara like an arrow. She hugged her daughter tightly, crying softly, asking God for wisdom. At the hospital, the team gathered to discuss the case. "Without a transplant, he won't survive more than a few weeks," the hematologist said. Clara remained silent, feeling her heart race. No one suspected that the solution was closer than anyone imagined. That night, Clara sought out Dr. Gustavo, her trusted colleague. "What if there's a donor, but she's too young?" she asked, trying to hide her anxiety. Gustavo looked at her strangely, but replied sweetly,
If it's a match and there's authorization, any life is worth a try. Clara spent the night awake, staring at the ceiling. She thought about all the times she swore she'd never get involved with Marcos again, never let the past touch her again. But now, his life was in her hands, or rather, in the veins of the daughter he never knew existed. Days later, she signed the necessary paperwork, keeping everything anonymous. Yulia would be the anonymous donor. "Is it just a little prick, Mummy?" she asked, smiling. Clara held her small hands and replied with a choked voice, "Yes, my love. A little prick that will change everything." During the collection, Clara watched the procedure from afar, her chest tight. Yulia, brave, talked to the nurse and laughed, not understanding the importance of what she was doing. The room smelled of alcohol and hope. As the equipment was wheeled into the operating room, Clara leaned against the wall, crying silently. Her daughter had just given Marcos what he could never give her, a second chance.
And, without knowing it, Julia had become the invisible link that would unite again two souls that time tried to separate. The transplant was scheduled for Monday morning. The hospital seemed to breathe with anticipation. Clara watched the activity without showing emotion, but inside, it was chaos. Each step she took echoed like a silent prayer. Fate had drawn its line, and there was no turning back. During the procedure, silence reigned. Doctors and nurses worked with surgical precision, while Clara waited outside. Time dragged on, measured by the ticking of a wall clock that seemed to mock her anguish. She kept her hands clasped together, her eyes fixed on the ground, praying to God that everything would go well. After hours of tension, the door opened. The surgeon removed his mask and smiled. The transplant was a success. Now it's just a matter of time and your body's response. Clara closed her eyes, allowing herself to breathe for the first time in days. A silent relief coursed through her, a mixture of victory and guilt. For the next few days, Marcos remained sedated. His body, now carrying his own daughter's blood, slowly began to react. Clara watched him from afar, trying to reconcile her feelings. Pride for her daughter, pain for the past, and fear for the future. Julia recovered quickly, radiant as ever. "He'll be fine, right, Mummy?" she asked, her eyes shining. Clara smiled, caressing the girl's face. "Yes, he will, my love. You were such an angel." Julia laughed, unsure of how true that statement was. While Marcos slept, Clara remained silently beside him in the early hours. Sometimes she held his hand and remembered the nights they swore never to be apart. Now she helped him be reborn, but hiding the secret that could destroy them again. One night, Dr. Gustavo found her there, crying softly. "Clara, you're hurting yourself with this secret," he said gently. She replied, her eyes lost in thought. "Sometimes silence is the only form of love we have left." Days later, Marcos began to wake up. His skin was gaining color, his voice was returning, and the doctors were excited about his recovery. He looked at Clara with gratitude, unable to understand why her gaze seemed to hold a sea of unsaid things. When Julia showed up at the hospital with flowers for the boy she cured, Clara nearly broke down. The girl climbed onto the bed and held his hand. Marcos, tears in his eyes, smiled. "You gave me life, little one," he said. And Clara, watching the scene, knew there would never be enough silence to hide that truth for long. The days following the transplant were slow, almost silent, as if time respected the process of life returning to Marcos's body. He woke up little by little, feeling his strength returning. The sterile smell of the hospital mingled with the distant sound of machines, and between blinks, his gaze met Clara's. There was something in that face that brought both comfort and pain.
Clara maintained the emotional distance she'd sworn never to break, but each day it became more difficult. Seeing Marcos smile as he took his first steps, hearing his hoarse voice calling her name, it all rekindled memories she'd struggled to erase. The forced coexistence brought the past back to life in small gestures, glances, and shared silences. Marcos, still weak, tried to comprehend the emptiness in his mind. He dreamed of a girl with brown hair and curious eyes, the same one who visited him and made him laugh with innocent questions. "You're my hospital hero," Julia had said one morning. He couldn't explain it, but there was a strange feeling, as if that smile was already a part of him. Clara watched them from afar, her heart torn. Julia adored Marcos, and he, without understanding why, seemed deeply touched by the girl. When she laughed, he laughed along. When she left, the room grew colder. The life he thought he had lost now manifested itself in the presence of this child who illuminated him. News of his recovery spread. Reporters camped outside the hospital, shareholders sent flowers, and messages of strength flooded the social media. But none of that mattered. The man who once valued numbers and status was now moved by something simple, a drawing Julia made with the phrase, "You are strong." One afternoon, Marcos asked to speak with Clara alone. "Thank you for not giving up on me," he said, with sincerity in his eyes. She simply replied, "I did what any nurse would do." But he knew there was something more in that voice, something she hid behind her professionalism. Days later, Clara found him staring at the reflection in the window. "You know what's strange?" he said. "I feel different. Like there's something new about me. Something I can't explain." Clara felt her heart sink. He hadn't realized how literal that statement was. As the weeks passed, Marcos was discharged. Before leaving the hospital, he sought out Clara once more. "There's something about you that brings me peace," he confessed. She smiled, but her teary eyes betrayed what her heart was screaming. "The peace you feel is your own daughter's blood running through your veins." When he left, carrying a bouquet of flowers that Julia had given him, Clara felt the silence that had protected her begin to break. Fate, once again, had not finished what it had started. Marcos's life outside the hospital began slowly. Recovery required careful attention, but for him the biggest change wasn't in his body, it was in his heart. The man who once woke up to spreadsheets and meetings now remembered the sad-eyed nurse and the girl with the bright smile. Two figures who seemed to heal wounds he didn't even know he had.
He determined to thank the team that had saved his life. He returned to the hospital in secret, without fanfare. When he entered the ICU ward, the sound of footsteps echoed down the familiar hallway. Clara was there, with her back to him, organizing medical records. Hearing his voice, she stopped. "I came back to see who really saved me," he said, smiling. She turned slowly, trying to control her inner turmoil. "You've already thanked everyone, Marcos. There's nothing more you need to do here." But he moved closer, ignoring her defensive tone. "Yes, there is. I need to understand why I feel like I've lost you, even though I don't know when I had you." The words hit her hard. At that moment, Julia came running down the hallway, flowers in hand. "Mommy, look who's here." Marcos knelt down, laughing, and opened his arms. The girl hugged him with the spontaneity of someone who loves without knowing why. "You promised to show me your office one day,"
she said. Clara froze, unsure of what to say. In the following days, Marcos began visiting them frequently. He brought flowers, chocolates, and stories. Julia called him Uncle Marcos, and every time she did, Clara felt her chest ache. He was becoming part of their routine, and the fear that everything would fall apart grew silently. During a simple dinner at home, Julia asked, "Mommy, why does Uncle Marcos have eyes like mine?" Clara gasped, her heart racing. Marcos, surprised, just smiled. But that coincidence kept playing in his mind all night long. Days later, while Clara was caring for another patient, Marcos stumbled upon an old ID card of hers, tucked away in the pocket of his forgotten lab coat. It showed the date of her hospital admission and the year she disappeared from his life. Something began to click. The past, like a shadow, was haunting him again. That same night, Marcos received a visit from Helena. "I hope that woman isn't trying to take advantage of you again," she said, venomously. Marcos replied coldly, "Maybe it was you who took advantage, Mom." For the first time, she fell silent. Alone, looking down at the city, Marcos felt he was on the verge of discovering something that would change everything. He didn't yet know that the truth he sought already ran through his veins and bore the name of a girl who called him Uncle. The hospital once again became a stage for reunions and restrained silences. Marcos insisted on visiting Clara and Julia whenever he could. Clara tried to keep things friendly, but knew that each visit brought danger closer. The secret, like a time bomb, ticked inside her. Until one cloudy morning, a name echoed through the halls: Helena Tarvis. The woman entered with the same imposing grace as always: high heels, striking perfume, and steely gaze. Time hadn't softened her, only made her colder. Seeing Clara at the counter, her hatred reignited. "You are still here?" she said, her tone like someone stepping on something unwanted. Clara paled. Ghosts don't warn you when they return.
Helena stepped closer, her words razor-sharp. "My son almost died, and you go back to him. What do you intend, Clara? More blackmail? More lies?" Clara took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "I'm just doing my job, Doña Helena." But inside, she trembled. Marcos appeared in the hallway and saw the scene. "Mom, enough," he said firmly. "She saved me. She's the best professional here." Helena, her pride wounded, replied, "She destroyed you before, and she'll do it again." Marcos didn't respond. He simply grabbed his mother's arm and pulled her away. The silence between them said it all. Later, Clara found Julia in the cafeteria, oblivious to the tension. The girl ate cake and smiled, while her mother's world crumbled inside. "Mommy, is Uncle Marcos coming today?" she asked. Clara just nodded, trying to hold back her tears. That night, Marcos came to their apartment. He brought flowers and a different look in his eyes. "Sorry about today. My mother doesn't change, but I have," he said. Clara wanted to believe him. They talked for hours, and for the first time in years, they laughed together. It was almost like before. Almost. Across town, Helena was examining a folder of old documents. Inside were copies of medical records, and a photo of Clara, who was pregnant. Her face hardened. "He won't find out from you, girl. Never." Meanwhile, Marcos began to question the gaps in his past. Why had Clara fled without explanation? Why did her memory always feel like an imposed lie? And why every time he looked at Julia did he feel something inexplicable, almost familiar? Love returned, but so did fear. And for the first time, Clara felt that the past wasn't just knocking on the door, it was about to break in. The day began like any other, with the din of elevators and the smell of burnt coffee in the air. Marcos had returned to the hospital for follow-up exams.
Clara treated him with the same professionalism as always, even though her heart was pounding. Everything seemed under control, until fate decided to play tricks again. While waiting for the results, Marcos leafed through a pile of forgotten documents on his desk. Inside were reports and files. A smaller envelope caught his eye. The name printed on it made his blood run cold. Julia Almeida, compatible donor. For a few seconds he stood still, as if the world around him had gone silent. He reread the name several times, trying to find some rational explanation. Julia, the same name as the girl who visited him, who drew hearts for him and called him uncle. A coincidence too cruel to be coincidence. Marcos stood up, the crumpled paper in his hands, and went looking for Clara. She was in the hallway, reviewing medical records. "Who's Julia Almeida?" he asked, his voice tense. Clara paled, the folder falling from her hands. The silence that followed was almost solid.
"Marcos, not here, please," she whispered, fighting back tears. But he insisted. "She's your daughter, isn't she? She is mine too, isn't she?" His gaze was a mixture of despair and anger. Clara closed her eyes as if the act could erase reality. Inside the private room, she finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Yes, Julia is your daughter. I tried to tell you, but your mother threatened me, humiliated me, and said she would destroy our lives if I didn't disappear." Marcos took a step back, as if he had been struck. "You took 8 years of her life from me," he said, his voice breaking. "And you took away my right to be a father." Clara wept. "And she took away my right to be a mother by your side. I didn't choose to run away, Marcos. I was thrown out." The weight of the truth hung between them, cruel and liberating. Marcos left the room without looking back. In the hallway, the sound of his footsteps echoed like hammers pounding on a broken heart. Clara fell to her knees, weeping silently. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, indifferent to the pain of two souls reunited by fate, by the most painful truth of all. That night, Marcos arrived home, looked in the mirror, and whispered through tears, "She gave me life, and I lost her again." Marcos didn't sleep that night. The clock struck 3 in the morning as he stared at the ceiling, Clara's words echoing like hammers inside his mind. "She's your daughter." 2 simple sentences, but enough to shatter everything he thought he knew about his own life. He got up, opened the window, and looked out at the city. The lights flickered, as if the world were mocking him. In the morning, he went to the hospital. Clara was off duty, but he waited for her in the parking lot. When she arrived, tired and with puffy eyes, he approached. "You should have told me, Clara. I had a right to know." She tried to answer, but her throat closed. "Do you think I didn't try?" she finally said, tears welling up. "I wrote letters, I called, I went to your house. Your mother took me in and made me choose between my son and my dignity. She told me I was the shame of her life. And you never reached out to me." Marcos felt the ground slip away. "I didn't know. She told me you'd abandoned me, that you didn't want to know me, that you were with another man." The truth, now revealed, was like broken glass. It cut them both equally. "We were puppets of the same lie," Clara said, her voice broken. He leaned in, gently touching her face. "I lost everything, Clara. And it wasn't the money, nor the company. It was you. It was her." The tears flowed, sincere. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, and the forgotten love reappeared, wounded, but alive.
But the pain was too great to erase with a touch. Clara pulled away, her body trembling. "You can't just show up and try to fix everything.
Julia isn't a reminder of what we lived through. She's a child, and you need to be strong enough to understand what that means." Marcos nodded, swallowing his pride. "I want to meet her, not as uncle, but as father." His tone was calm but firm. Clara looked at him, torn between fear and hope. "She's my life, Marcos, and if you do what your mother did to me, I'll never let you near her again." He swore he wouldn't repeat the mistakes of the past, but promises, no matter how sincere, don't heal old wounds. When Marcos left, Clara cried for hours. She cried for everything she lost, for everything that could have been, and for everything that could still be. That same night, Helena showed up at Marcos's apartment, cold as ever. "So you found out the truth," she said, expressionless. He looked at her, and something inside him shattered forever. "I found out, Mom, and you just lost the only son who still believed in you." The days that followed were an emotional minefield. Marcos, determined, severed ties with Tavares Holding. "I can't continue living off an empire built on lies," he told his partners, leaving everyone in shock. Helena tried to stop him, but he was adamant. The power that once defined him now disgusted him. Clara, on the other hand, tried to maintain normalcy. Julia had returned to school, unable to understand why Uncle Marcos had suddenly disappeared. "He's sorting out some things, my love," Clara said, trying to hide her guilt. But the girl was sensitive and could tell something had changed. One afternoon, Marcos appeared at the hospital door. He carried simple flowers, sunflowers, her favorites. "I came to apologize, not as CEO nor as the man who made a mistake, but as a father." Clara eyed him warily. He continued, "I don't want to force anything. I just want to deserve to be there." The gesture brought him closer to Julia. Gradually, the visits became routine. They played in the park, read stories, and shared laughs. Clara watched from afar, thrilled and terrified at the same time. Seeing Marcos and Julia together was beautiful and painful. Helena, upon learning of the rapprochement, had a meltdown. She stormed into Marcos's apartment, demanding that he come to his senses. He confronted her for the first time without fear. "She's the reason, Mom, and if Mr. Tavares had an ounce of love in his heart, he would know that a man's true legacy isn't money, it's the love he leaves behind." Helena looked at him helplessly, realizing that her son no longer belonged to her. For the first time, she fell silent. The empire she had built through manipulation and control was now crumbling under the weight of the truth.
Meanwhile, Clara struggled with forgiveness and fear. She wanted to believe that Marcos had changed, but the pain was still fresh. One night, he appeared at her door, drenched in rain. "I didn't come to ask for anything. I just want to say thank you for giving me life again." She let him in. They talked for hours, reminiscing, laughing through tears. When silence fell, he simply whispered, "If I could go back in time, I would have run away with you." Clara replied, with a sad smile, "Then run now, but run for us." Marcos understood. He didn't need redemption, he needed purpose. And that purpose now had a name, a face, and a girlish smile that called him Dad. The following months were filled with silence and distance. Clara decided she needed to distance herself. As much as Marcos had changed, she still carried deep scars. She requested a transfer to a health facility in the countryside, and with Julia left the big city. She wanted peace, a fresh start, and above all, time to forgive. Marcos respected their decision, But their absence devastated him. The apartment that once pulsated with joyful visitors was now a tomb of memories. He could still smell Clara's perfume in the air and hear Yulia's laughter echoing in the empty rooms. For the first time, he understood what loneliness was. Not the lack of people, but the absence of those who truly matter. He determined to become a worthy man. He sold part of the company, broke the most corrupt contracts, and founded Julia Almeida Foundation, dedicated to treating children with leukemia. The gesture, more than a tribute, was a silent request for forgiveness. Clara followed the news from afar. She watched his interviews on television, speaking with sincerity and emotion. "Life has taught me that wealth without purpose is just well-packaged emptiness," Marcos would say. She was moved, but still afraid to believe it. The words were beautiful, but love required consistency, not speeches. Meanwhile, Julia grew up, healthy and curious. One afternoon, he came across a news article about the foundation and ran to his mother. "Look, Mommy, Daddy's helping sick children, just like I did." Clara froze. The words "daddy" and "help" in the same sentence were like a sweet blow. Julia knew more than she let on. Deep down, Clara knew that running away didn't erase feelings. Every time she saw the sea, she remembered the day Marcos promised her the world on a sunny beach years ago. And every night when Julia slept, she looked up at the sky and wondered if he still thought about them. On the other side, Marcos wrote letters he never sent. "I don't want to meet you by chance. I want to deserve you by choice," one of them read. Time shaped him in silence, and little by little transformed guilt into mature love.
6 months later, he received an anonymous letter. Inside was a child's drawing. 3 people holding hands in front of the sea. On the back, just 2 words: "We are fine." He cried, with a smile. Fate had not given up yet, and neither does he. The sun was setting over the small coastal town where Clara and Julia now lived. The waves lapped lazily against the sand, while the wind played with their hair. It was an ordinary late afternoon, until Julia, pointing to the horizon, said excitedly, "Look, Mommy, someone's coming." Clara turned around, and for a moment, her heart stopped. There he was. Marcos walked barefoot on the sand, his gaze serene, a bouquet of sunflowers in his hands. The same gesture as before, but now without the weight of guilt, only with the humility of someone who understands that love is not imposed, but earned. For a moment, no one said anything. Only the sound of the sea filled the space between them. Julia ran first, hugging him joyfully. "I knew you'd find us!" she cried. Marcos knelt and wrapped her in a tight hug. "You brought me here, my little light." Clara approached slowly, her eyes welling up. "How did you find us?" she asked. He smiled. "I followed my heart. And a drawing." He showed her the folded paper with Julia's illustration, now wrinkled with age, but still intact in its sentiment. "I didn't come for asking for forgiveness," he said, his voice breaking. "I came to say that I finally understand. Love isn't about what was taken from us, it's about what we still choose to build." The words struck a chord. Clara took a deep breath, her heart torn between fear and hope. "What if I can't trust again?" he asked, his tears streaming down his face. Marcos stepped forward and replied, "Then I'll stay here as many days as necessary until I can. I've waited 8 years. I can wait longer."
His sincerity dismantled the last barriers. Clara embraced him, and time seemed to double. The sea witnessed the reunion that fate had postponed but never forgotten. Their hands met, their eyes met, and for the first time, the silence between them didn't hurt. At that sunset, Julia danced at the water's edge, laughing loudly. "Look, Mom, we're together again!" Clara and Marcos looked at each other, smiling. It was simple, pure, and finally true. The past had not been erased, but transformed. And on the sands of that beach, love found a new beginning. Dawn brought a new kind of silence to the small house by the sea. It wasn't the silence of fear or absence, but of peace. Clara prepared coffee while Julia ran around the yard trying to catch butterflies. Marcos watched from the porch, barefoot, feeling the wind on his face. It had been a long time since he felt truly alive.
The simple house, with white walls and a hint of sea air, now housed what he'd always sought in mansions and penthouses: love. Clara smiled differently, with a lightness. Julia, with her contagious energy, filled the room with laughter. It was home. Imperfect, but real. And for the first time, Marcos realized he needed nothing more. In the following months, the routine took on a new rhythm. Marcos continued to manage the foundation remotely, now with Clara as an advisor. She engaged in donation and awareness campaigns, while Julia appeared in promotional photos with a special badge: Little Donor, Big Heroine. The world began to know the girl who saved her father without knowing it. Sometimes, Clara still found herself observing Marcos in silence. She saw in him the man she loved, but also someone new, shaped by pain, loss, and forgiveness. Arrogance gave way to serenity, control to compassion. He was no longer the impenetrable CEO. He was simply Marcos, the man who had relearned how to feel. One night, as they sat on the porch, Clara asked, "Do you ever regret everything that happened?" He looked out to sea and replied, "I regret not fighting for you sooner. But if it weren't for all that, I wouldn't have known love in its purest form, through our daughter's blood." The words hung in the air, light and true. Julia appeared soon after, with a notebook in her hands. "Daddy, look what I wrote for school." It was an essay with the title, "Who Taught Me What Courage Is?" In the text, she spoke about the transplant, how love can save lives, and how, sometimes, being brave means forgiving. Clara wept silently. Marcos hugged her, and time seemed to stand still. Months later, during a foundation event, Marcos spoke to an emotional audience. "A few years ago, I believed life was measured in profits. Today, I understand it's measured in bonds. I was saved by a gesture of love coming from someone I didn't even know was a part of me." The audience gave a standing ovation. Clara and Julia wept in the front row. As he left the stage, Marcos lifted Julia into his arms and whispered, "You gave me life." The girl smiled and replied, laughing, "But now you're the one helping other people live, Daddy, so I guess we're even." The audience cheered. Destiny, finally, seemed at peace. That night, the three of them walked along the beach. The calm sea reflected the stars. Clara held his hand and said softly, "Perhaps forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, but it transforms what's left into love." Marcos kissed her forehead. "And that love is what keeps us alive." The wind blew gently, bringing the salty scent of the ocean and the sound of the waves, the same sound that had cradled their first kiss so many years ago. Now, however, there were no promises of eternity, only the certainty that what is reborn from forgiveness never dies again. Their story had begun again, and this time it was forever. They discovered that true love is the kind reborn from forgiveness. What about you? If you believe that every life deserves a second chance, subscribe to the channel now, because here every story proves that love always wins, even when it seems too late.